What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who served time in other prisons. We're going to be talking about life before prison, life in prison, life out of prison. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. Welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. We have a very interesting guest today. I first want to give a shout out to Greg Churin, who's an old fraternity brother from the Phi Delta Theta down at Mizzou. And he's down in Arkansas. And he came across and knows my guest. But there was a article that was written in Outside Business Journal, but it was generated by Andrew Gibbs-Dabney, who's the founder CEO of Lives in Designs. And what spurred all this was Andrew went to prison in 2011, and and he'll explain all this, but it was caused by a colleague's Oxycontin haze of owing some money to some bad people and kind of being at the wrong place, wrong time, all these things hazy, and he robbed a liquor store. Going forward, as we always talk about on this podcast is, what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Well, after prison, how do you adapt? How do you survive? Well, Andrew went out, he got his bachelor's degree, he got married to the love of his life, had 2 kids, and started a really cool company that he's passionate about. And what happened with this LinkedIn post, there was a guy that he was looking to be an investor to help grow the company, and he backed out. He backed out because he went the background check easy and say, hey, I'm not good with that. That's every guy's fear in the world of business and being an ex-felon. What was really interesting about how Andrew handled this is he just said, hey, that's it. I'm not going to let them use that leverage against me anymore. I'm going out front with it. And he posted this really cool, honest, authentic post on LinkedIn. And he talks about the intrepidation of about a week going by and not letting that publish button go, and he finally posted it, and he got a tidal wave of support. He's got new investors now saying because of what he said in his post, he wants and they want to be investors. That then generated the Outside Business Journal, wrote a really cool piece. All this came to me through Greg. Greg and I connected, and then I was able to connect with Andrew. Andrew, I'm really happy to have you on and you to tell your story. Andrew Gibbs-Dabney, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the nice intro, and I'm really happy to be here. Appreciate it.
Andrew and I had some issues yesterday. This is round 2 for us. We were trying to do our deal. I usually link up if somebody's not in town through Zoom so we can see each other while we're talking, and we couldn't quite get our internet thing to work. But today, all's well. Nothing's ever easy, right, Andrew?
No, when you need stable internet, that's when it decides to become very unreliable.
Yeah, it's like a bad, mad girlfriend that you used to know, and she comes and ruins the party. So, Andrew, your story is interesting from a lot of different aspects, but take us back a little bit to where you were as a kid. Was it a normal childhood? What were your interests? Mom, dad, siblings? How did all that shake out for you?
Yeah, and I think there is some tie to what I ended up doing in my story from a childhood, because I was actually born with my feet severely pigeon-toed. So as opposed to feet going forward slightly out, my feet were actually pigeon-toed to the point where they were facing backwards. And at the time and the location I was in, the treatment for that was surgery. So resetting the bones, casting, and then as you grow, assuming you're born with this, you have to do that periodically every really year to 2 years. until you're, out of that insane growth cycle of childhood. So from 0 or 2 weeks to 12, I had 8 surgeries on both feet.
Did they have to cast you, Andrew, on that? Like every time you did that, was it almost like a broken casting type thing that went on?
Yeah, I was actually casted to my hips both times.
Okay.
So it was, my leg was in kind of a bent position. You can't see my legs, but cast all the way to the hips on both legs. And lots of time in the hospital. And I obviously don't remember the first few surgeries, but as I became an older child and spent a lot of time in the Children's Hospital, specifically down in New Orleans and in Little Rock, Arkansas. And other than that, though, I mean, when I was
wondering, Andrew, on that type of thing, because you as a kid, that's not usually what kids have to go through, all those different surgeries. Do you think that indirectly created some kind of inner, I don't know, strength or something that, usually kids don't have to do that. And you went through, and you're very humble about the fact of how you went through it and don't remember a lot of the pain in that, but it's still a lot of surgeries that kids don't have to go through. But it seems to me like you'd have to build up some kind of something that I can get through this. This is another surgery. I'm going to have to go through it. I'm going to have to get through it and recover and all those different things that have to go on with that.
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, looking back on it, I think there's some truth to that. At the time, I was just a kid who wanted to ride my bike and play basketball. And,
right.
I didn't spend a lot of time. I don't remember a single time dwelling that there was a surgery coming up. I'm sure I knew. Then while I was there, it was just play N64 in the hospital bed, do what I can until I'm back out of those casts and can go do things that kids do. I grew up after 2 years old. We moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and my family lived by Wilson Park, which is this really great big outdoor park. And my memories of childhood were getting home from school and getting on my bike and riding down to the park and building forts and playing in the creek and all of that, punctuated by these times when I wasn't doing that, obviously, because I was casted. But as a kid, kids are just resilient, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's some lasting effect of that, in my psyche that I haven't really analyzed or thought much about. One of the things that I think is interesting when it comes to my individual path and issue with prescription drugs was, there's your brain works in certain ways, and the more you do certain actions, consume certain chemicals, your brain becomes more efficient at those things. And so as a kid, I was prescribed morphine and was obviously in the hospital on pain medication for all these surgeries all through childhood. And I think it has something to do with later on in college when I became more explorative in my substance use. I found opiates, and it was just kind of an immediate comfort with that substance, and I think that has something to do with my eventual addiction to it.
Probably felt familiar. And I think the other thing was familiar to you is, one of the things you talk about in your LinkedIn and the article is to find your passion. It seems like your passion was finding that park and doing all those outdoor things, because and now you're this founder of this company that lives in designs, and it's all about the outdoors. And I think that's cool that, a lot of people will go their whole life and not find their passion. And with you, Andrew, you went through a lot of different maps to get to where you are now, but your journey's been back to your passion. And, one of the things that you say, I think is so good is my past is not my present, but it brought me here. Love that.
Yeah, I think that's crucial for me specifically. And I'm hoping, as I shared this LinkedIn post, I didn't have necessarily a big altruistic goal with it. It was, like you said, I wanted to bring my past to my present. I wanted to do it on my terms. But I think that's true of a lot of people that have any sort of criminal or conviction background, is that experience formed who they are today, but it's not necessarily who they are. And so it's hard to have something that was such a big event in someone's life, and specifically in my life, so big and such a big experience, that you then kind of closet or table or put away and then don't speak about, because while it's not the thing that you are today, it obviously had a big effect on you, and you wouldn't really do that about other events in your life or things just because they're more socially acceptable to talk about. And so
I agree. And I think the other thing, Andrew, about that is that, and I think you probably felt this also, is somehow it's taking back a little bit of that power of your story, so that your story can't be used against you. You own it, and you're telling it the way that your narrative. And those people who are saying, we can't do this because I think he was hiding the fact that he went to prison. No, I'm telling you what happened. I'm telling you my story. And then all of a sudden, these people get behind the underdog of the story and say, yes, this guy deserves a second chance. I think that happens so little because of the courage that it takes, because you hitting the publish button was, does this kill my company? Does it kill everything that I've built and believe and love and have passion for, or does it free me? And a lot of what we talk about on all these different stories is, how do you get through your nightmare to finally set yourself free? A lot of it is stepping into the fear. A lot of it is going ahead and hitting that publish button. And I've jumped ahead of us, but going back into what brought you to that point, you go in, you're a kid, your parents, I think you had said, split up at some point, and so you had did they live on opposite sides of that park?
Yeah, so I think when I was 6 years old, my parents split up, but I mean, it wasn't nasty or anything like that, and they ended up moving to both different sides of the same park. And so that made it, I could kind of traverse back and forth and spend time with my dad and my mom, and all of that. And yeah, so that happened when I was
good
very young.
relationship, good relationships with mom, dad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good with both. And I split time. I think most of my smaller childhood, I split time between my mom and my dad's at different time. Not like split week usually, but like one parent for a couple of years and the other one for the next couple of years. And but we were in the same school district, and all those things. And I stayed in Fayetteville all through my childhood, in that same area of the town, which was near downtown, near the university, and very very traversable for a young kid. So actually I had a bike, and that was my ticket to freedom. And rode around the park, rode around campus, rode around downtown, and that was kind of my stomping grounds.
Yeah, your childhood sounds very similar to mine. I had a creek, Pearson Creek, and I had that whole world of building forts, and we had a undeveloped land, beside. It was the crazy thing about that is, I think that we've lost some of that too, Andrew, with our kids. Everything's so scheduled, and you spend an hour at this soccer thing, and everybody brings treats, and then you go over here, and it's scheduled. That free time for kids to just gone riding their bike, and then they come back when it's time to eat. It's not like that anymore. And I think we lost a little bit of that, and it was probably my generation that messed it up, because it's a different world that the kids grow up in now.
Yeah. We'll see. I have now two kids, two boys, one's 2.5 and one's about to be 1 year old. And we're lucky to live in an area, and that's a little plug for Northwest Arkansas, but we moved from Fayetteville to Bentonville recently, and either one would be great. But where we are has a culture around outdoors and mountain biking, and so there's organized mountain biking in the schools. And I'm not, if the kids don't end up being into that, that's totally fine. But one goal I have as a parent is to try to recreate some of that opportunity that I had to be near, like you said, kind of undeveloped open outdoor spaces that are still within walking distance of home and safe, so they can get that sense of freedom in a more, in a controlled fashion. You're not, just sitting out on the streets. So
that would be, I think, bringing that back in is huge if you're able to do it. So, Andrew, going back into where you were, you got out of high school, went to college, and I think that's kind of where things, as sometimes always does, kids go, it's like a free ticket to paradise. You've got total freedom, nobody's around, parents aren't there. How did this world change for you, or did you get with just a group of friends that were all kind of experimenting and living life, and you got too far into the wrong path?
Essentially, I got to college, and that's a whole wide world of freedom and opportunity, and you can take it many different directions. Unfortunately, I was, fortunately or not, it's hard to look back and judge. I was inquisitive and open to new experiences and new substances. And at some point during freshman year, someone offered me some Oxycontin, And like I said, it was almost an immediate, just friendly feeling, something that felt natural and increased confidence and all these things that everybody says about opiates that they do. I had no real, in my head at that time as a freshman, I didn't link up what I knew inherently about something like heroin, growing up, like stay away from heroin. I didn't really equate that to this pharmaceutical, this pill, that was handed to
Sure.
me. And
I don't think most people do.
yeah, I think, now there's so much been covered so much, and unfortunately there's such a terrible, epidemic of addiction around opiates, and it's much more dangerous now. We won't get into that, but I'm lucky that I kind of got in and got out before what's going on with basically mislabeled fentanyl and things that,
Right.
one dose and all these things. So anyway,
Killing people.
Through freshman year, was casual with it, I guess, as much as you could. And but eventually something happens, I think, to everybody that or most people that take that past the first use is, what was a Friday and Saturday night thing is then all of a sudden a Sunday morning hangover cure is then, what you're just doing it on Sunday afternoon. Then what was recreation now becomes dependence. And instead of taking something for fun, you're taking it to, make breakfast, or, go to the store and go shopping, or go to the bank, because you actually can't physically operate without it. And there wasn't a lot of time between, first recreational use and full on physical and mental dependence on the substance. And that, takes us pretty much through several years of college. I switched from a business major to a philosophy major, which I really enjoyed my time in class, but I was a poor student. I wasn't showing up for obvious reasons, but I was reading the books, and that actually had a pretty big lasting impact on me. And kind of what's on our shelf, mirrored over here, is from that. But ended up getting dismissed from University of Arkansas for poor grades, and never was on the streets because I did have some family support, so I had a place to live and food on the table. And give me 1 second, we'll pause that. Someone's at my door. Just be right back.
Okay. You good?
Yeah, sorry about the brief interruption, but I can step back. I mean, like, so I was dismissed from U of A, and had a place to live, but wasn't doing well. I was really down on weight. I had a drug habit that was several $100s a day just to get by, and no real income. So in that situation, I ended up owing people that you shouldn't owe money, a lot of money, and wasn't thinking straight. And, the actual act itself, I know more about from reading the witness testimony from the cashier than I do of myself. Like, my memories, of that are kind of like scenes from a movie that you kind of flash through your head, and
almost like a dream.
Yeah, and on top of Oxycontin, I would often, mix the use with other drugs like Xanax, and that one has a really bad reputation of having a serious effect on your short-term memory. And in that particular haze, I made the decision at some point to go and rob a liquor store. It was very amateur. I was wearing a motorcycle helmet. I think I was browsing the wine section for over 15 minutes, like presumably working up the courage, but I don't remember that real thought process. Asked for what was in the register, not demanded. I think I said please. I left on a motorcycle, and just the whole thing was amateur, was stupid, was nonviolent. And I think a lot of that is why I ended up getting the second chance that I got. The facts of the case supported a young
really were
idiot on drugs, not a sophisticated criminal or someone with menace or malice in their heart. And I regret it.
Well, Andrew, I was going to ask you, how did you took off on this motorcycle, knowing, I mean, I'm sure the adrenaline rush was, oh my God, I just robbed a liquor store, which you'd never done before. What did you go and do after that?
I don't really recall the ride home. I don't really recall what I did that night. What I did the next day was bought some drugs, and went camping. So that was kind of my default. Throughout all of this, I've been an outdoor enthusiast, so whether a drug addict or not. I was
That was
actually
kind
out.
of your escape. Yeah.
Right. And so I was actually out in the woods and had set up camp and was sitting by the fire. And I said I'd cell service where I was. And someone called me and said, "Hey, did you rob a liquor store?" In the moment, I was like, "No," and that kind of speaks to the haze of this, the way these drugs treat people. And people, it's hard to,
Yeah.
you just need to know this. If someone that your loved one is in this state, they're not looking back on what they did and framing things. They're not recollecting. They're not what's the word I'm looking for? They're not processing emotions. In that moment, I didn't remember it. Like I didn't realize why, how I'd gotten
Hmm.
to the point where I was, and I was like, no. And then I thought, and I was like, oh shit. And then they said, hey, I see your picture in the paper, and that got me to pack up camp and head back to town and start down the path of clearing this thing up.
So did it come? I can't remember how the story went. If they came to you and busted in and said, and arrested you because they had you on camera, or did you go to them and say, hey, I got to clear this up. I think I robbed a liquor store. What happened on that?
So it's somewhere in between. So I went to the at 8 a.m. when they opened. I went to the police department the next day and walked in and said, hey, my picture's in the paper. I'd like to clear this up. I don't know what my
Okay.
game plan was at that time. I'd also, as I said, to function normally, you have to be a little bit, you have to have
Yeah.
some substance use. So I was at that point, yes. And, didn't have a game plan, but as soon as I walked in, they did the good cop, bad cop thing, really cold room. Let's get you some breakfast. Just started asking me all these questions. And I realized pretty quickly I needed a lawyer. Obviously people, I did the thing, right? So like I realized that in that moment I did have some clarity and was like, okay, I needed to get some help. So I was actually allowed to leave and walk out without an admission of anything at that point with my lawyer. I phone called him, but really what I think they were doing was trying to see what I was going to do. So I went home, and I don't know, at some point that afternoon, my house was raided. So, knocked on the door with people with
You got a little bit
AR-15s
of
and
both.
shotguns and SWAT
Yeah.
gear and all that kind of stuff. And so I got a little bit of both, and they arrested me at that point. That was a
Andrew,
fairly traumatic experience.
I'm sure it was. So can you walk us through that? Because I mean, that would have been something that you'd never happened in your lifetime. What was it?
I mean, it wasn't, they didn't bust the door down. They knocked, and I saw them, and I said, and the only thing that was actually the most traumatic to me at that point was my dog. Very friendly, but obviously when you have 15 people in full body armor coming in, she was in the corner barking, and I was just terrified that they would shoot the dog. So that was actually the more traumatic part, was saying, hey, let me control her. She's nice. She's a lab. Like, she's not going to hurt anybody. Just let me get her and put her like out back. Yeah. And so they did. And, from there on, I was incarcerated for, starting that day. I had 3 days in jail, Washington County Jail. My parents had made the decision to make arrangements while I was there, not let me out. I think it was a smart decision on their part and hard for me at the time. I was actually in a walking boot from a previous motorcycle crash. And so I was in 23-hour lockdown in jail, detoxing cold turkey. And that's a, very unpleasant experience. With opiates, you can do that and not have a physical risk. It's just terrible, terrible, terrible feeling, but you're not going to die from it. You can't pull somebody off of a strong alcohol binge and just cold turkey. And it's dangerous. But so I went through that part in jail, and then I'm lucky
and
enough.
Jail, and as people might or might know, jail is really the bottom of the dirt pile of lockup. There's prison, and people are figuring out how to make a life for themselves in that world. But jail, I mean, you get every single walking person who's either got up for a DWI or they just killed somebody, and all that happens right there, and everybody's right there. How did you feel or adapt to that world going in? Because it's a very unsteady world that you're entering when you do that.
Yeah, and I didn't have any experience with that really, and my first jail experience was solitary, like I said, because I had a walking boot and I had an injured foot. Mm-hmm. I wasn't put into general population. I was putting into a lockdown wing. So one cell, one person, 23 hours, mm-hmm. 1 hour out to make a phone call or whatever to kind of walk around, but I couldn't walk. And so more than anything, I was just suffering through withdrawals in those 3 days, and not being able to eat, not being able to sleep, skin crawling, the whole shebang. And so I didn't have to. Luckily, I wasn't doing that in general population with a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
I'm sure there would have been some sympathy among the inmates, but who knows?
Yeah, there is. There's usually a couple of people who want to help you out.
Well, there's usually dozens of people going through the same thing. Like the jail and prison is more of a treatment for drug and mental health issues than criminal issues. And so I wouldn't have been the only one in that same boat, but I was alone through that.
So Andrew, what were the next steps with this whole thing? Your parents obviously find out about this. What is their reaction? Were they? I guess I should ask. Were they aware that you were in the way that you were before it happened? Had you had talks, or were they trying to help, or was it you on your own path, and they weren't really? You were living two separate lives.
It was more of the latter. I mean, they knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
I failed out of school, and I was obviously looked unhealthy, and they didn't know exactly what it was, but they knew something was going on.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and there were, there wasn't intervention or any sort of thing like that, because they didn't know what it was. And I was, functioning enough to pull it together for family events. Although you just can't hide that kind of stuff. You look terrible. Right. You don't think straight. You don't talk right, and things like that. So they made arrangements for me to go to rehab. I went down to Austin for a 90-day inpatient when I made bail. My bail wasn't astronomical, but made bail after 3 days. Went down to Austin for the next 3 months, and went to an inpatient rehab. And this is where, as you mentioned, or as I talked about, my experience, I think, can potentially help people, but my experience is not the same experience that most people in the system have. Most people don't have the ability to go to a 3-month rehab and have the family support to pay for it. And so I was lucky enough, and continue to be lucky enough, to have that support to help facilitate this second chance. So I had a good lawyer, went to a good rehab, and I made the choice. Like I said, I'd already been 3 days in to a cold turkey detox. And when you go to rehab, they offer you can go through a medicated detox to kind of bring you down softly, so you don't have to go through all that pain. And I made the choice to forego the 7-day chemical detox and go straight into rehab. And my thought process at the time, and this is when things started to become clear, even though it was still much of a haze, was, there's consequences to what I'm doing. I'm looking at it. At the time, I was looking at 40, I was charged with aggravated robbery. That's 40 years to life, class Y felony. So I was looking at minimum 40. And I made the choice. That's a lot to think about. To feel it, right? I wanted to feel the full detox. I wanted to feel the physical effects that this substance had on my body. Because I had withdrawals before, but I'd always managed it with medication, right? So, I wanted to really feel it and have that be, the combination of the consequences I was looking at for my actions, plus the physical effects of what I was doing. I wanted to basically hit myself with as much reality as I possibly could, so that when it comes time to have those decisions and those thoughts of, could I go down this road again? Could I try? And it's no. The answer is no for me on that, because of where it led.
Plugged into your memory base. Yeah, makes sense.
Right. Yeah, and I think, to kind of further along, I was in rehab. I took it seriously. I was at a good rehab I really liked my counselor and small group, and did a lot of, obviously you do a lot of self-discovery. I engaged in the AA 12-step program, but more importantly, I think it was just engaging and figuring out who I was and what my goals were. And in that moment, and in those moments when I was looking at best case scenario, restarting my life over at about now. So in my early mid-30s, which is when I would have gotten out on good behavior on a 40-year state sentence. I was like, okay, I'm going to spend 8 to 10 years in prison. What can I do during that time? How can I set myself up to restart my life again at 32 or 33 and not waste what is still a long life, right? So I was having this thought of I'm gonna burn 10 years, but really burn's a bad word. Like you said, people in prison figure out how to make a life there. I didn't know that at the time, right? And it's a terrible thing. I think I wrote this in the post. It's completely awful. It takes away your freedom. It does all these things, but also, people try to make the best of it.
Yeah.
You kind of, you try to create a comfortable zone for yourself. You have a small group of people you interact with. And in my experience in prison, I should say this up front, was not typical either. I was only in general population for a week before I went to a boot camp. So I went from 3 months in jail, Washington County,
Hmm.
to a week in general population. And really, I say general population for the first 4 or 5, I can't remember if it was 4 or 5, but the first several days of that was solitary again and processing while they were waiting to put me at my unit.
Yeah.
Um, but I got transferred out to a boot camp program, and that was a big part of my plea. So we're getting a little bit ahead, but like the rehab, plus I did as much community service. I volunteered through that as you could. They facilitate it, but you can kind of go above and beyond. I checked out of rehab and into a sober house and continued to engage in AA and community service, and at the time, was calling all family, friends, and people that knew me for who I was and saying, "Hey, will you write me a letter?
Yeah.
Will you talk about me? Just say,
Support.
this person deserves." They call them character letters, and so I
Hmm.
gathered up almost 20 of those from some people in the community, including law enforcement, friends of the family, people that knew me for who I was and would vouch. And so we went back to the judge, with my lawyer, and said, "Look, first offense. Um, I've gotten clean and sober. I've been on the right path now for I think it was 4 or 5 months at that point. Here's all these character letters. Here's my plan for when I get out. I'm going to land at my parents' house. I'm going to get back into school. I'm going to do all these things.
Hmm.
I'm going to restart my life." And the judge, once again, like, I think this is a privileged position of what I look like and who I am, and the ability to present this kind of case, did the right thing in that moment. And obviously I'm biased, but I think that he looked at the facts and said, "This is obviously very serious. You're going to do some time." He gave me a 10-year, he pled it down to theft of property, um, different class of felony. It was 20 years with 10 years suspended. And so in Arkansas at the time, if you had 10 years for a nonviolent crime, which was nonviolent, you can go to boot camp. So I did go to boot camp, went through that process for another 3 months. It was 105 days, which was military discipline, yelling in your face, drill, boredom, but none of the fun. No useful skills taught. No
So let's
survival
talk,
skills, no
Andrew.
combat skills, any of that.
Andrew, I've heard about that boot camp thing, but so when you go to boot camp, can you walk us into it? Like, is it a dormitory? Are you given tasks to do every day? Because I know
So
prisons,
it's,
but the prison boot camp,
yeah,
what can you walk us inside that?
sure. So I mean, the setting is Tucker Prison in Arkansas near England, which is down in the Delta, or like kind of at the start of the Delta in the flatland. So in the middle
Okay.
of summer too. So it's hot,
Hot and
it's
humid.
muggy. We've got a big barracks, so just a big metal building. It does have air conditioner, so it wasn't like we were sitting there in 110-degree heat, but and it's a big wide room with, I think, about I'd say 120 to 130 cots all lined
Yeah.
up in rows. Imagine the size of half of, like, 50 yards wide, maybe
Yeah.
30 yards deep, with rows of cots, and then a command center in the middle, kind of with a glass where all the guards,
Hmm.
the drill instructors sat. So it's military style. It had 4 drill instructors at any given time, and they ran through in different shifts, like all, and then we're organized into flights. So of 120 or so people, I think there was 5 groups of inmates that were in, and I think I was B flight, I remember. And so you're like, that's your unit.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just discipline and building patience, really. There wasn't like it depended on the shift. Some shifts were really active, of drill instructors that really cared. Like, there was one that, like, you could tell really was in there for rehabilitation, and they
Hmm.
wanted to beat some sense into these kids, not usually physically, but um,
Right.
and would actually give some drill. You do PT, workout. You do education on certain topics, like little classes and stuff like that. But that was only one of the 3. The other 2 were not really there for rehabilitation. I think they were there for a paycheck.
Yeah.
Some of them weren't very far from their active duty, so all the drill instructors were actual military members. It was an Air
Hmm.
Force boot camp, so we followed the Air Force drill manual, but we had drill instructors from the Marines, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and some of them were not there for the right reasons.
Yeah.
So they would kind of power trip. And so we woke up at 3:30 a.m. every day, and Whitey Tidy stood up and counted. Everybody goes to the bathroom at the same time. You shower in shifts together. you eat, you can't, you if you want to say anything, you say, uh, you do a sir sandwich, which is like from the movies, what they actually do in military and prison, this particular prison boot camps, say, sir. You couldn't say I. You had to refer yourself as this inmate. So you'd say, sir, this inmate requests to utilize the latrine, sir. And they'd say, wait, we're doing it in 20 minutes. Sit back down. So there was some days where it was drill and PT and actual activities, and there was more days than that where it was all waking hours, except for going to the mess hall. We're sitting on a cot with nothing. You did, and you were allowed like 3 photos. You could have the Bible and a drill manual, but you couldn't read them except for certain times. And you'd get a major disciplinary, which you get 3 and you're out. You get a major disciplinary if you fall asleep. So Wow. It was a lot of time just sitting there, exactly like I am now, with no backrest for 3 months, just staring, thinking.
Like mentally, how did you handle that, Andrew? What was your? Because you had just gotten something that had to have been like, you felt like you'd won the lottery. Went from possibly looking at 40 years, 20 years to 10, then you get this prison boot camp. So I know that your mind had to have been spinning that, there's all kinds of different things. I was thinking 8 to 10 years. Now I'm thinking if I can get through this boot camp, what I can do to restart. But when you were going through that, how were you? Did you have strategies to get through it, or were you just doing it?
So, I mean, when I was in rehab, I got into meditation. One of the guys I was there with was very spiritual, and we went to some monastery type environments and practice meditation. And I'm really grateful for him that I was like rooming with him at rehab, and he brought me into that world and exposed me to it, because those skills of being able to kind of watch your thoughts or even transport yourself in some way to another place, which, I mean, kind of happens when you're in that situation with that much time to think. Your mind will wander. You will find ways to occupy your mind. And I'm not much of a worrier. And I don't know if I'm just wired a little bit wrong. I don't worry about things that much, which just also can lead to things like what I did, right? I'm not like ruminating on the future and worrying about what could happen. And so at that time, like, I was doing various things in my head to keep awake. I remember doing things repeatedly. An exercise I would go through would be to imagine myself back in my house making something to eat. So I would like imagine myself on the couch, and I would, in excruciating detail, like I'd tell myself what I was wearing. I'd get up, I'd look around the room, I'd identify everything. I'd go to the refrigerator, I'd open it, I'd imagine what was in the fridge. I'd imagine making a sandwich, and just the details of it. Like, is the bread, checking to see if the bread's bad, and putting turkey on it, and then, toasting the bun, or, the bread and all that kind of stuff. And just stuff like that. Lots of planning, right? Lots of like, okay, but you can't write anything down in that situation. You have a little bit of time to write a letter once a day, but you can't like make notes about plans and have a grand design. It's all in your head. So, it was just dealing with boredom. I think I wrote in the post, like, boredom's really in your head. You can entertain yourself, you can occupy your mind. And that's, I think,
did you feel like that you made any connections in there when you were going through that just kind of raw boot camp world? Were there like-minded people in there?
There were. And so when you get out in Arkansas on this particular program, which unfortunately I think is not funded anymore, I need to find that out. But you go out on a special parole. It's more intense. You go to more meetings with your parole officer. You do more drug tests. You do more all that kind of stuff, and you're expressly forbidden from having any contact with people that you were locked up with. But that being said, I didn't afterwards, but there were people that I was locked up with, all the way, people that I went from Washington County Jail to all the way to prison to boot camp with. There was 2 people particularly that I knew that were highly intelligent. They were not from a similar background to me, but they were just really great people. I had more conversations on stuff that I learned about in philosophy with a particular guy in jail all the way through boot camp when we could. And he was just brilliant.
Don't you think that's probably one of the bigger misconceptions, Andrew? Like I noticed that you had written about this in your post, is that there's some really smart people. Maybe they weren't doing something legal, but they were dealing with, sales, distribution, commissions, the whole network of what you have to do to build a company. if you could plug those people into society on the legal side, there's so much that they can offer because their mind is already wired intelligently to make those things work. And I think that's where it gets somewhat short-sighted by saying, okay, well, those people were in prison or they sold drugs or they did this. But man, I ran across quite a few people that were smart people.
Yeah, and it's just a lot of it comes from opportunity. So really smart people that are in a bad situation, they don't
Yeah,
have the ability to kind of uh, work their way through the legal system the way that it can be done. And
yeah,
like I said, I was fortunate for this. They're just stuck there, and there's wasted talent and wasted opportunity. And a lot of times, all they need is a chance or a place to land. Because that's the other thing is like when you get out of prison, I was able to go to my dad's house and stay and have food and shelter and a supportive environment.
right.
A lot of people get picked up by somebody who hands them a joint,
Yeah,
and I'm not saying like weed's going to send you back to prison, but like that's the environment. They're going back right into
right.
the environment that led them there in the first
And
place.
they're going to have a
And
hard time, finding a place to live.
yeah, you
People
can't
won't
get a
rent to
job,
ex-felons.
you
They
know.
won't give a job to an ex-felon. So that's the other thing I noticed in your post. You brought a lot of people out that wanted to talk about what they did for ex-felons. I remember there was one guy that said, we make it a point in our company to hire ex-felons and we don't ask about their background. There was a lot of people that came forward. And I think, by doing what you did with your post, it allows people to express themselves on things that they're trying to do to help. Whereas if it's not ever expressed out there, it all kind of is under the covers and you don't really know about it. But I want to go back to Andrew with going through getting close to knowing you're getting out. What's going through your head?
I mean, everybody knows this inherently, I think, understandably, but time is relative. It's very true. So like your experience of time has a lot to do with your situation. And 105 days in that situation felt like so much longer than it was.
Yeah.
And so as you get closer to the end, there's some things that happen. Like when you get out of prison, there's things you have to do. There's forms you have to fill out. There's like, you have to test yourself for like HIV and all these things, there's a process to get out of prison.
Mm-hmm.
So like those things started, and that's when it started to feel really real, even though it was like 15 days out, right? 2 days. And then really what I was worried about is I had just by nature of being, even on good behavior in boot camp, I had several of those major disciplinaries, right? I had to go to review with 3 to say, please don't kick me out of boot camp. Because if you get 3, you're kicked out, you go back to general population, you serve all your time. You don't get a second chance at this boot camp thing.
Okay.
And so I was already on like, don't screw up. And none of it was bad. It was like, I was washing the windows because I was told to on the outside of the barracks as part of the chores, but then they called count. And they called count and I was outside the building, which is like a serious violation.
Oh, yeah.
Even though I was ordered to do it.
Prison.
Right. So I was ordered to do it, but the superior officer of the
Yeah.
guy who ordered it to me didn't. So I got him. It's stuff like that. I had smiled in drill because the guy next to me was like singing like Creed on the like the chant, what we call the cadence song.
Yeah.
He was just making it a big show, and I smiled and got a major discipline. So my point was, I was already on like thin ice to get kicked out, and there's 2 weeks left. So I was more thinking about like, don't breathe wrong. Don't fart when a drill instructor walks by, because that actually can get you in trouble. Like there's just dumb stuff. So like, I was just like, okay, do not screw it up. Don't mess it up. Like this is 2 more weeks. You can do this. And there's probably an experience. I've never really talked to anybody about this, but I'm sure it's common, is that like when I was getting out, like being discharged, you go through this whole process, right? You get your clothes back. My parents I didn't have clothes because I came from jail, but like my parents brought me stuff to put on. I put on street clothes for the first time, which just felt amazing, even though it was the weirdest selection of clothes my parents could have brought me, like things I hadn't worn since like 8th grade. But anyway, I was in street clothes, and it did not become real until we were off the prison grounds. Like I walked out the first gate, I'm like, okay, they could still, for some reason, I didn't know what, but I was sure they were going to pull me back in for some clerical error or something, and be like, you're doing it. So the second gate, and then we got like walking the parking lot. I'm like, oh my god, but there's still a tower right there. Get in the car. It wasn't until we drove all the way off, it was a prison farm, all the way off the farm and onto a highway, that I like took a breath out.
Yeah.
Like it didn't feel real until I was off prison property.
Yeah.
Like it felt like at any point they could just bring me back. So anyway.
Well, let's talk about Andrew. You get back into life. You've done your your time at this boot camp. And I've heard about these boot camps. There's nothing easy about these boot camps. And they make it hard on purpose because they're giving you less time. So they're going to haze you to see if you can make it. But it seems like that you didn't want to waste any time when you got out. What was going through your mind as far as your plan and what you were doing and what you were thinking at that point?
Yeah, I part of what had happened to me over the course of that time was a lot of self-reflection and planning, and it actually ties a lot into the brand that I've built, the values that were built on, but I didn't know it at the time. And it was this idea that
which
life
is a Swedish name, right? A Swedish stands for
it stands for one who lives Nutade, and it stands for one who lives life fully. And that, and this idea that like I didn't want to waste time. Like, time is precious. It's the only thing you can't get back. Life is short. And so as you look back and you get this advice from people, and in prison, you get lots of advice from people, whether it's solicited or not. And you always hear, you never look back and miss like when you're on your deathbed, you're not going to think about the things you owned. You're going to think about the people you knew and the experiences you had. And so to me, I took that to heart and thought, you can't get through life not acquiring things or managing things, but I wanted to have an experience-filled life in the outdoors with friends and with family. I wanted to get my education. I wanted to have knowledge in my head and be able to keep on, using my mind. And basically that's the experiences over stuff. And this is what became Lives In. But at the time it was just, okay, I got to get this back on track and be able to set up the best life I can. And, considering what I've done. And so I got out and went to, I was at my dad's, like I said, and I got accepted, or I guess I enrolled at the local community college. So I did a couple semesters there and got straight A's in community college, got some more credits because I'd already had like 80 some odd credits from undergrad. Went there, earned some. I did some just because I wanted to. I did like wilderness first responder training and stuff like that because I wanted to get my wilderness first responder license. And
That's cool.
But I got good enough grades to get back into. I readmitted to University of Arkansas. Had to go to the committee for readmission. And actually, this is the first time that I had to explain my criminal background, right? Because that was something that came up on that as background check. So I had to, first time explaining. I wanted to get an apartment, so I had a friend in Fayetteville who was Air Force, and officer, going to officer training school, and seemed like a good person to really kind of live with at that point. And we got an apartment, and I had to explain it again. It came up on the application.
And a lot of times they won't rent to you because of that. That's
we weren't at a super nice apartment complex, so I think they were okay with it.
What's funny about that, though, Andrew, is that we talk about this some on this show, is that the ex-felon is the last breed of individuals in the United States that it's legal to discriminate against. Almost everyone else, you cannot. It's illegal to discriminate, but you can legally discriminate against an ex-felon, and whether it's living or job or whatever. And that's just something that you have to work with. And you have to have the story and the passion and whatever to get through that so that they feel that you're different.
Right. And you're right. And it's a very complex problem, right? Like, there's reasons that those rules exist, and some of them are to protect people. But when you consider that the United States incarcerates more people than anywhere in the world, you realize how many people are wandering around with a felony record. You can't think that all of them are terrible people and deserve this, right? Like and once again, like my experience isn't necessarily representative. If I didn't look like I did, and if it wasn't two clean cut, white guys walking in to tell this story, it may have been a different experience than someone else getting out of prison trying to get an apartment that doesn't look like me or talk like me and things like that. So I think it can't be overstated that, like, I don't think that I don't diminish anything I did. Like, there's personal choice, and people with a lot of privilege end up in prison all the time, or just screwed up and not doing anything with their life. So there has to be your personal, like, drive and motivation to get that done, but also combined with, having the support that so many don't have. Like, it made my story possible. So I don't want to harp on that, but it just, as people want to tell my story as part of like a diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, I always want to point out, like, it's great if we can shed awareness on what you just said, that ex-felons can be discriminated against, that there should be more opportunity, that it shouldn't be set up to put someone back in prison, because it is.
Yeah.
That's great. But I don't want my story to be told to a bunch of people that grew up in, the worst conditions in Chicago, drop right back into those conditions and say, look at this guy, he made it. Look at, use me as
totally
examples, because they're not going to get it. They're not going to say, oh, I'm just like him, I can do that too.
Right.
But like I said, if my story can eliminate more people that would listen at the policy level, that people are going through this and running into these roadblocks, and it's having a serious effect on like economic output for your region, things like, basically, if you can tell the story in ways that it can be heard by people that have the levers of control, then that's where I'm comfortable, telling my story and trying to make it more than just mine. But like I said, I told my story, like, for me, I told my story because I wanted this to be out on my terms. I wanted people to know, so I didn't feel like I was hiding it from somebody or a group of people or the business community. And if there's a good side effect to that, then that makes me happy.
Oh, I think there's a great side effect to that. I think there's two different things to it, Andrew. I think one is it gives you your power back to your own story. You're telling the story the way you want to tell it, and the narrative is not written for you of how someone else has already decided that they're going to couch that story. The way that you tell it, the passion that you tell it with, the courage that comes out, that you're humble, but the humility and the willingness to hit rock bottom and make a choice. So many people hit rock bottom, and that just becomes the fetal position they stay in. And then there's other people that hit rock bottom and say, I'm going to survive this. I'm going to get better. I'm going to do the things that I need to do to make things happen for me. Those are things that people are looking for, that a lot of our society is lost because it's kind of become a victim society. I think the more we hear stories of people taking their situation, and no one's perfect, how do you take that situation and walk through the fears to get where you want to be? And that's common across the thread. You can be, and I've had a lot of different people on this show. It doesn't matter where you came from. Everybody wants to know that there's a glimmer of hope if they just try and do the best they can to get through. And I think that's what it's inspiring to me to hear your story. I grasp onto immediately. And the other thing is that there's so many people out there that have a hiccup, a mistake, something in their background, and if it's a felony, you have to carry that with you regardless. It doesn't matter what you do in the rest of your life. You will always have that. It's, I always say, when you get as an ex-felon, you are carrying a life sentence with you regardless. You just have to learn how to work with it. And that's what I think is really cool about your story is you've worked with it. And so you go to college, you do well. I know that you find the love of your life, but I don't know how you did that. How did that come about?
So, yeah. And my wife is much more private than I am. So I like to, respect her privacy, as much as possible in situations like this. But we were dating before. So we were dating in college, and at this time we had broken up when things got really bad. So the period of time when I got really bad and ended up, doing what I did and going to prison, we were not together as a couple. We were, we still wrote letters every once in a while and when I was locked up, but for her own mental health, she had to let me go. Now when I got out and was on this path, as I was at University of Arkansas, I was going back for recreation sports management. My goal at the time was to be a mountain manager. I wanted to move to like Keystone or Breckenridge and be the person in charge of all mountain operations. That was like my
very cool.
Like if I could have any job, because I figured out, they make, well over six figures. You're in an office job, but your job is to get out and be on the mountain too. So like that to me was like pinnacle. It still is I wouldn't mind.
It's a great idea
going there, but that was in my head as like, I'm going to go to this. This is my end goal. I'm going to get rec management. I'm going to, move out west. I'm going to be a lifty for a while and work on the ski lifts and just work my way up with a degree. So that was my plan. Along that way, a friend one of my old roommates at the time actually was working as a co-founder for a company called Fayette Chill out of Fayetteville, which is this like lifestyle outdoor apparel brand, mainly branded t-shirts, but we expanded into all sorts of, full on outdoor clothing. And I was working at the University of Arkansas in the bookstore doing shipping and receiving kind of end deliveries and stuff. So I had some experience, and he's like, they need Like, we need someone to come and work in our warehouse and help pick and pack orders. And so I took that opportunity, full-time job with a salary, that kind of stuff. I never had that in a startup, never been in that situation. And couldn't do full-time school and full-time working at the same time. So I actually transferred from University of Arkansas to John Brown University for a night school program. It was for managers, 2-year program that if you had over 60 hours of credit, you could do this 2-year program in night school and management. So it's organizational management undergrad. It's kind of like an executive MBA program, sort of, but for undergrad. And I ended up finishing, getting my undergrad in organizational management from JBU while working through Fayetteville. And at that point, I went from kind of warehouse manager to doing web and logistics, like website, to be the COO. And then I eventually served as a CEO of that company for about a year and a half ish, about a year and a half of COO, doing kind of running most of the moving parts. One of the guy who actually founded it outfitted a Sprinter van to live in with his girlfriend at the time, or maybe fiance. I think it was a girlfriend. And then and they're married now, but they took a trip around the United States for about a year and a half, and I managed the company while he did that.
Wow.
So through that point, we, my wife and I, she was living in Little Rock and doing corporate work, and we started talking again and started dating again, basically restarting a relationship. And that's a very tender process. And she decided to move back up Northwest Arkansas and take another job up here in a big company up here. And we got married and bought a house, and I was working full time, and doing all this and started that, I'd already started the process, but that's when, things became very clear that this was in the past and we could build something on top of this that wasn't damaged. And I still had lots of friends in Fayetteville. Like I said, like I wasn't actually like a sleazy, you can't be a great person when you go through all that, but I wasn't an asshole. Right. I still had friends. I didn't burn all my bridges. There's obviously, I changed my phone number when I got out, and there was a whole group of people I did not contact again. But there was a whole group of people from college that were from high school, that I still knew and still really close with to this day. And so we had a social group, and still do. And we're only 20 minutes north of Fayetteville now. We're in Bentonville.
So when you got started with the idea of Lives In, because you had been in a startup, I guess that probably helped you understand what the steps were that needed to happen for you to become a CEO of your own brand.
It was like an MBA, and it's what my dad told me when I was working there. He's like, it doesn't matter if you don't get paid a lot, you're getting a real world MBA. Right? Like there's nothing better than being a part of a business that's growing, to learn how to do it on your own terms. And a lot of that experience led to learnings that influence what I'm doing today. And it's just like, you learn about hiring people, and you learn about, how to onboard employees, and you learn about, how to set up a structure and responsibilities and roles. And because I'd seen it go wrong, right? You do the wrong things several times. You kind of have an idea about how to do it right. And we've done all of our own new wrong things at Lives In based on new path, but we've avoided a lot of the things that I think that we went through there that were just young company problems that everybody has.
Absolutely.
But I was able to kind of ride along and deal with and manage, but without the added burden of being the owner. And I have a lot of empathy towards that individual now, having now gone through it myself and being on the kind of side of where everything's on you. Whereas I was CEO for a group of owners, it's somewhat different, it's nuanced, but it's a different level of responsibility.
So what do you see with your company? Because you guys are kind of up and coming and outdoors and just continue to grow.
Yeah, I mean, we're one thing I learned, and maybe it has something to do with my experience through all the legal stuff too, is that the foundation you build upon is the most important thing. And so, when I started this, it was very much like I raised some capital, and it was, I'm not going to go push sales this year. It was, I'm going to build a foundation. We're going to build the brand, the visual brand, but also more importantly, like what it means and why we're doing what we're doing, and build a really solid product and wait until that product is good before we go to launch, so that we don't ruin the launch with a subpar product. And because where we're going and what our plan is to be the best in the industry, not second best, not not middle market or lower pack. I mean, so the way you build something for that kind of reputation is different. And so I spent a lot of time on the foundation, and So now we're growing fast. That foundation's strong, and I feel like we're ready to. We're putting gas on it. So
I can tell that things are moving quick. The things that Lives In, they've got apparel. What all can somebody get from Lives In?
So we're outdoor apparel. We've really focused on pants and shorts. So, and we went through some actually,
which are cool looking, by the way. If you want to go to the site is called Lives In Design.
Lives In. Yeah, you can just go to livesin.com, LIVSN, will redirect you there.
Yeah, cool stuff.
So yeah, I mean, like we do pants. We do, and our whole goal and everything about Lives In is based on this idea of creating products for this Lives Nutara, this person who lives life fully. And so, like, if you are going to chase an experience-filled life in the outdoors, what are you wearing? What are you buying? What are the things that facilitate that kind of life? And that's the clothes we make. And so we started with pants more from a passion project for me, because I just I couldn't have pants that fit well, that kind of did what I wanted them to do at the same time. And so we focused on a really tailored fit, good durable materials, very sustainable. So everything we do is designed to be repaired. It's designed to be repairable. It's designed to be tough. It's all organic cotton, recycled polyester, recycled nylon. So everything is environmentally friendly. We don't do plastic packaging. It's all roll packed with paper. We do everything we can to build a company the right way, and build a product, and then care for that product all the way to its end of life. So like, we just basically had this idea that once we sell it to you, it's not your problem anymore. It's still our problem. Like we created that, we brought it into the world, and we used the resources to do it. We took the time and
I love that
energy. So we want to see it have a long service life. And once again, this is all kind of back to this philosophy of not creating low quality things, because waste is the biggest issue we have. Like, it's just, I don't, political or not, like we're kind of destroying our home. And so it's not a lot about like what something's made out of in my mind. Like, sustainability is usually wrapped up in whether it's recycled or organic or whatever. It's, did anybody need it in the first place? Did something else do it just as well? And then, is it made to last? Like, you can make something out of like, this is, I don't know how to say it, just like out of the world's worst materials, but if it lasts for a lifetime and does its job well, then hell yeah, it's the most sustainable thing you could possibly make, because it lasted. And then there's also a cultural side of this, and so we look for customers and people that have already made this choice. And so that's the other side of it. You have to kind of choose to not
fill that niche.
To not be so consumption driven, and you have to consume. That's what I'm getting at, is nuance. It's like, you have to consume to be somebody. You have to own things. And so it's just like, if you're going to you swallow that pill, what can we do next? Right? You have to consume, you have to do things. So how can you do it in such a way that,
and I like your idea to be the best at it with and own that category. Don't try to just fit in and say that we'll be the mid-level outdoor people. We're just going to be the best and own that category, and knowing that we do what we do because this is why we do it. I like that.
Yeah, and
I like that.
There's some, I guess, hubris there, but it's my point is, like, we're not going to be the best now. Like, I think we make the best pants in the industry now, but we're not. Like, it takes time. It takes credibility. It takes at bats and iteration. But I think the foundation that I was talking about, this idea of how we build and how we create and how we operate as a company, is designed to lead us to be the best.
But you can't. What you're saying, Andrew, is you can't be the best unless you set out to have that as a foundation of what you're building to.
Right.
Because everybody then buys into that and believes in what you're doing, because that's the path, the best of whatever that is. Everybody starts to live that. That's the feel. There's so many different. It's a mindset too. The old Henry Ford quote: "Whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right." That's also how you build a company. It's how you feel, how you build the foundation, what those people feel, how you reward those people, what they feel about you, and how you feel about them. All those things make that foundation of the company, of whatever that is. And you can walk into any company and feel that vibe. You either feel that or you don't. And it's because somebody's worked on it. And that's, it's not easy. If it was, there'd be a lot of companies just blowing it up and being the best.
It's not easy, and not everybody has to do it either, right? Like, it's just, for me personally, if I was I know myself well enough to know that if I'm going to maintain passion for something, if I'm going to maintain intellectual interest and want to really keep trying, I need to be really interested in it, you know, and
Yes.
I need to love it.
Yep.
And by building it this way, I love the thing we're building. And, you know, I don't want to ever lose that. But it kind of gets back to what I was saying before. Not everybody needs to do that. Not everybody has to. Like, a lot of people are in a situation where you just need to make ends meet for your family, and you may, you know, do a low priced, you know, bottom market plumbing service for your region and price yourself lower and kind of, you know, work at that same kind of level. But like, it's honorable, right? So like, you don't have to, there's
You own
places
that
for all sorts of
category.
things. It's just,
Yeah.
you own that, and you don't have to be great. I just, you know, for people that make a product, and this is, and I'm involved in the entrepreneurship community here and other places, you know, talk to a lot of young people, and they want to make something. And it's like, the only challenge I say is like, just don't make something that's copied. Make something, but do it unique, you know, no matter what it is. It can
Stand
be
out.
low market, it can be mid market. Just don't, if all
Make a
you're
difference
doing
and stand out.
is going to a manufacturer and finding a product that's previously made and putting your logo on it and relying on a brand, and your brand is the only thing that's differentiated, that's when I kind of lose interest in helping somebody, because they're not trying to actually add something. They're trying to just kind of make a buck off something that didn't need to be existing. So anyway, I'm kind of on a soapbox now, but it's, you know, it's,
I get it. No,
I don't want to be
it.
pompous about it.
No, you're speaking my language. And like you said, if somebody wants to be in a mid-level and own that category, there's a whole world for that. There's all kinds of different ways to make yourself into the brand you want to be, the culture you want to be, and own that category. It just depends on where you want to fit into the market. That's what makes the world go around, and capitalism works. Andrew, this has been a really cool conversation. I was thinking, looking at all these different things along your journey, I always ask everybody, you know, what after they look back on this journey that they've been on, what do you think is your biggest takeaway that you'd share to the listeners through what you've gone through?
You know, that's a good question. I think I'm lucky. And it isn't, maybe, like, obviously what I mean by that is that I did what I did. No one got hurt. I got off in the best possible way that you could, having done something like that and being guilty of it. Right. So like, and that the gravity of it was so serious, and that, like I said, looking down the barrel of 40 years at the minimum, or potentially life in prison, was serious enough for me to realize that was rock bottom, right? Like that I had a rock bottom, that I was able to be in a situation where I could realize that and make real change off of it without anybody getting hurt, without losing so much of my life, and without losing all my friends and family and relationships. And so like, I think I'm lucky that I did something so serious and it didn't turn out as bad as it could have. Because I could have done, you know, what I think about, what scares me is that, like, if I didn't get caught, like if I was more sophisticated, if I planned that better, if I was you know, and like, what would have happened next if I didn't face any repercussions for what I did? So I'm lucky that I did it once, no one got hurt, and it was serious enough to enact, you know, kind of facilitate the kind of change that I needed.
Yeah, I think that's thought-provoking. And I think it also leads us back to, sometimes people hitting rock bottom can find their soul, find themselves, and that becomes everything that they wanted to be. They just had to get to that point where that decision was made, and your decision was, I'm going to do whatever I've got to do to make this work for me. And you did. And you started stepping out of it. Now, I mean, I'm looking at, you know, what you've been able to accomplish, and the cool brand that you're creating, the just avalanche of support that you've had, stepping out, controlling your story, your narrative. Just a lot of really cool stuff, Andrew. And I feel lucky I got a chance to interview you, because I think this story is going to resonate with a lot of people out there that deal with that, what we're talking about. You know, what do you do when you hit it, and how do you step through it? How do you survive, and how do you adapt? And you've done that. And nothing's ever over either, is it? I mean, you always have to continue to walk and deal with whatever today presents you, but the tools of your past you can use. And that's what you continue to do. Is, you know, your past doesn't define you, but it certainly helps you get through the rest of whatever we're going through.
Yeah. And that, you know, I guess another lesson is perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of hit on it. It's like when you've kind of been through all this, when you've seen how bad it can be, it makes day-to-day challenges, and especially in business and things like that, just not seem as drastic, right?
It's
Like
drastic.
things can be so much worse, and I
So
think
much
the
worse.
perspective there helps a little bit.
I wear these 3 leather bands that I had a guy that made them for me when I was at Leavenworth, and I mean nobody really knows this. I don't even talk about it. It's just you and I talking, Andrew, with all these other people. But I look down sometimes on my wrist and think, no, today's not as bad as I think it is. This is just a day that I just need to get and grit it and make it, because there's been worse days. And there's things that you don't think about it all the time, but it is a piece of you, and it's not a bad thing. It's just a thing that I think it also steadies you, grounds you, and keeps you human and definitely humble. Because once you go through an experience like this, it definitely humbles you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's a whole another conversation on the prison intake system and what it does to you and all that kind of stuff. So yes,
Oh
there's
man,
there's humbling experiences there. But we don't need to get into it. Yeah,
no, but you are so right. It's a system they use that you can feel it coming off of you. You can feel your freedom, like it's like it peels off of you as you walk through the intake. It's very humbling.
Yeah.
Andrew, hey man, this was so cool. I want to tell everybody while we're out here, I'll do a little self-promotion. If you need a book out there, I've got one, Nightmare Success, Loyalty, Betrayal, Life Behind Bars, and Finally Getting Free. A memoir, that's me. Check it out on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Love you guys on social media with the likes, comments. Hey, they're doing a thing with Apple. If you can give me a review, go down, scroll down the page, click on write a review. It really helps the show on promoting with Apple. If you want to find out more about what's going on with me, where I'm speaking, what I'm doing, BrentCassidy.com. Leave me a message. And as I used to say when I was communicating back and forth with my TrueLink emails while I was at Leavenworth, signing off. Stay strong, and I'll do the same. Thank you, Andrew.